Okay, good morning, church family. It is again really good to see all of you here this morning. I want to welcome those again who are worshiping online with us, the Southside Church of Christ. Again, I know things aren't ideal, and this is probably going to be our new normal for a little while, but I do think it beats the alternative, and I do hope that you are blessed by being here this morning and are able to gain something from our period of worship and study together. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. These are the words of Jesus Christ. They are often spoken after a very important parable or very important saying that Jesus would give. You can find him saying this throughout most of the Gospels, particularly in Matthew and Mark. But Jesus tells those who have ears to hear to listen. We talked a little bit on our online Wednesday night devotional about the Good Samaritan, where an expert in the law asked Jesus what he needed to do to inherit eternal life. And so Jesus asked, well, what does the law say? You are the expert after all. And so the man said to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, that is correct. And so then the man followed up with a question and said, Jesus, who is my neighbor? And as silly as it may seem, I think we need to bring up the question this morning, who has ears to hear? Well, we know everybody has ears. That's not an abnormality. That's not something that's unique to a certain group of people. I think all of us here in this room have at least two on our heads this morning. And I know we can get into the technicalities of, well, I had my ear cut off, or, I'm deaf and can't quite hear. That's not the point. That's not what Jesus is getting at. The point is, everybody needs to hear what Jesus has to say. That's the point that he is making. We all need to listen to Jesus when he speaks. And I think this is something that we oftentimes struggle with. We all have a voice. We all have opinions. And given the chance, we want to make sure those opinions are heard loud and clear. I think social media has been a great example of this over the past several weeks and months. Everybody has suddenly become an expert in everything. And whenever something is brought up online, there are always people there to make sure that you know what they think about it and that everybody else knows exactly what they think about it. Everybody has an opinion, and everybody wants to share it as often and as loudly as they possibly can. But as Christians, I want us to ask this morning, is that what we ought to be doing? Should we be sharing and voicing our thoughts and opinions as loudly as we can? Or are we to be following what Christ commanded of us and listen? Listen carefully to what is being said. I'd like for us to look to the scriptures for advice on how to handle these situations. Again, I know social media wasn't around in the ancient world, but the principles laid for us back there are still applicable in many aspects of our lives to this day. So let's look at the scriptures on how to handle these situations, how we can seek advice and seek wisdom from those who have laid it out for us there in the scriptures. When we think of attaining wisdom from the Word of God, we think of the wise men, the wise people. The wisest of all that I think we might have recorded, save Jesus himself, would be Solomon. We have many of Solomon's works recorded here. Solomon prayed for wisdom, and God granted it to him, one of the wisest men to ever walk the face of this earth. Solomon received his wisdom, and it is recorded for us to have here in the scriptures. So since we have it there, I think it would be a waste to not use it, to not look into the wisdom of Solomon and see how it can help us navigate the very tricky world that we find ourselves in right now. So let's turn to the book of Proverbs this morning. If you'd like to go ahead and turn there. Look at Proverbs for the wisdom of Solomon. And as we look at the wisdom of Solomon, the question I want to raise is, will we listen to it? We who have ears to hear, will we listen to what Solomon has to say to us? There's a difference in just having ears and having ears to hear. We can listen, we can hear something, we can hear the noise being made, but sometimes, especially in my case, it seems like it goes in one ear then right out the other, I heard the noise, but that was about it. That's not what Jesus means here when he says, those who have ears to hear, let them hear. We have to take it in. We need to study and digest it and understand it and then apply it to our lives. That is those who have ears to hear and understand, what's being said, why it's being said, and again, how we can make it a part of our own lives. So this morning, as we look at some brief snippets from the wisdom of Solomon, let's make sure that we listen and not just, hear it, not just absorb the noise, but actually take time to ingest it and try and understand why it's being said and how we can use it in our lives. Not just coming in one ear and then out the other, but have ears to hear and attain this wisdom, because it is here for our understanding and our study and our knowledge. We can make it a part of our lives just like Solomon made it a part of his. So many of Solomon's works are found there in Proverbs. Proverbs are supposed to be practical. They are to be used for life application. They give advice that's useful for the real world. So I think as we look at Solomon's works today, we should be able to find some help in how to navigate, again, the very tricky world that we find ourselves in. Solomon even says there that fools do not heed the wisdom of Proverbs. Solomon himself there in Proverbs chapter 12, verse 15 said, "The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice." The wisdom of Solomon, right there at the beginning of chapter 2, or Proverbs chapter 2, verses 2 and 5, not 2 through 5, Solomon makes it known that his wisdom, and wisdom in general, is what we ought to be seeking. Proverbs chapter 2, verse 2, "Turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding," moving to verse 5, "then you will understand the fear of the Lord." This echoes what Solomon would later go on to say in Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." Wisdom is something that we ought to seek. Just like we talked about this morning in Bible class, righteousness is something that we ought to seek. Wisdom is something we ought to seek as well, because it is good, it is right, and it draws us closer to God. Solomon even says in Proverbs chapter 19, verse 20, "Listen to advice and accept discipline, and at the end you will be counted among the wise." So this morning I want us to very briefly look at 3 important snippets of wisdom from Solomon about using our ears to hear, about listening to those around us. And hopefully we can gain some applications from them. They're all very similar, but each one has a very unique angle I think we can use to apply to our lives and make our presence as Christians as known as peacefully and submissively and lovingly as we can. The first is found in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 2. Proverbs 18:2 says, "Fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions." I want us to note the very strong language that Solomon uses right here off the bat. Solomon calls these people fools. He calls them ignorant, uneducated, dumb, obnoxious. That is the one who airs his own opinion without listening to those of others. He says these fools don't take pleasure in understanding. He says they don't care to hear why someone believes what they believe. They don't want to know why someone believes what they believe. They just want to make themselves heard and known. They want to make sure people know what they think about something. They want other people to listen to them as opposed to them listening to other people. And Solomon says that that makes them happy. Do we know some people like this, maybe? Do we sometimes find ourselves looking in the mirror and seeing this person? I know I certainly do, and I certainly regret the times that I have done that. I try not to be, but again, it's so hard sometimes to step back from a conversation and listen to what other people have to say. And if this is us this morning, then Solomon says we are fools. He says we are fools as we rejoice in hearing our own opinions and not listening to those of others. I think it's important that we take time to understand where our fellow man is coming from. Even if we don't agree, even if we think the opposite, and we could not disagree more with that person, I think it's important for us as Christians to always at least hear them out, hear what they have to say. Whether or not they're right can be determined later, but I think it's a very Christ-like thing to listen to what others have to say and hear them out when they speak. The second this morning is Proverbs chapter 18 again, verse 13. Moving down to verse 13 in Proverbs 18. Solomon says, "To answer before listening is folly and shame." So here Solomon follows up on what he said in verse 2 of the same chapter. People can be so eager to make themselves known and make themselves heard that they speak up without listening. They want so badly to be heard that they'll drown out anyone else to make sure that their voice is heard. To make sure that if anybody is going to be heard, it is them above all others. They don't even hear what the other person has to say, They say, "No, I don't like you, I don't agree with you, so I'm going to make my statement known, and that's going to be the end of it." Does that sound like a wise person to you? Does it sound like somebody who seeks God, who hungers and thirsts for the righteousness, like we talked about this morning in Bible class? To me, it sounds like somebody who would be selfish and uncaring and unloving and harsh and cold and always wanting to make sure that they are the center of attention. I think as Christians, it's important for us to not be the first to speak up in these situations, to listen to what other people have to say, to show the love and compassion that is expected of us to show to other people. Let be said what needs to be said. Then when the time is right, the discourse can be had and we can speak up, having listened, having heard, having gained an understanding of what is being said, what's being brought forward, and from there we can make the best possible decision and reaction. And our third and last one we're going to talk about this morning, going to keep things rather short, is found in Proverbs chapter 19, verse 27. Proverbs 19:27. Solomon says, "Stop listening to instruction, my son, and you will stray from the words of knowledge." Right here, Solomon addresses us directly. He says that if we stop listening, then we are intentionally avoiding knowledge. Ego is something that a lot of us, myself included, have some trouble getting around and keeping down. If somebody tries to instruct us, if someone tries to correct us or educate us, especially about a subject that we think we already know a lot about and have a good opinion on, then we don't want to hear it. We don't want to be corrected. We don't want to be told that we are wrong. And so when that happens, we tend to fight back and show some hostility to defend ourselves and prove why we think this thing. But Solomon says that we are to be open to instruction, be open to new teachings and hear the thoughts of others. We don't have to agree. We don't have to change our worldview because of it, but at least hear out our fellow man when they have something to say. That is how we gain knowledge. It's often said that, especially in your social circles, maybe physically or on social media, that if you just surround yourself with people you already agree with, who hold the same beliefs and opinions, then there's no growth there. You live in an echo chamber, You hear the applause, but there's just one person clapping. It's stagnant. It's stagnation. You can't grow that way because you're not exposed to other things. And so Solomon says here that we gain knowledge by experiencing different things, by hearing different things. That's how we can formulate our own thoughts and strengthen our own minds and make sure that we understand what's going on before we have something to say about it. So with Solomon's advice on listening to wisdom heard, we've now heard it, what do we do with it? How do we make Solomon's wisdom a part of our lives? Well, let's take a look around the world right now and see what all is going on. If you've been on the news over the past several weeks and months, again, it seems like you know that our world is hurting, that there is a lot going on in our world right now. There are disasters and destruction and diseases, and people are crying out for relief. People are crying out for help. And this cry for help rings out in many different forms. You know, some are crying out for physical relief, and some are crying out for mental relief, and some are crying out for spiritual relief. Some are crying for rebuilt homes, and some are crying out for medical care, and some are crying out for injustices to be righted, issues that are affecting lots of people. There is an outcry for it, and I think it's important for us as Christians, as we hear people pouring out their hearts and pleading for help, that we ought to, at the very least, listen to what they have to say. So as we scroll through the news or scroll through social media and we see something that we might not like or might not necessarily agree with, and our initial reaction is to just dismiss it or to go on or to say, you know, that's nonsense, I don't agree with that, they don't know what they're talking about, you know, they just want to make themselves heard. Well, in that case, we want to make ourselves heard. We want to counter, to rebuttal, and to, for lack of a better term, provoke those that are on there. You know, that's human nature, because it makes us comfortable when faced with something that is uncomfortable to just dismiss it as not as valid or not as relevant, because then we don't have to challenge ourselves. But as Christians, I think our first reaction should be not to speak, not to dismiss, but to at least listen, hear out what our fellow man has to say. And again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be there to address or correct wrongs or correct sins. Of course we should be. But what is our purpose in addressing those wrongs? What's our purpose in correcting those sins? Is it to put others down? Is it to prove them wrong and prove ourselves right? Or is it to show the love of Christ and to save those souls who are lost? I'd like for us this morning to not forget Titus chapter 3, verse 2. Which says, "Slander no one, be peaceable and considerate, and always be gentle toward everyone." I don't know about you, but I know at least a few people on social media who could use to see that verse every now and again. I'm certain you do too. And let's remember James chapter 1, verse 19, when James summed up this whole matter very nicely and concisely for us. "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." If you find yourself on social media or in your social circles seeing things that you don't agree with, things that get your blood boiling and get you all riled up and hot-headed and fired up about things that might prompt you to post things that rile other people up and, you know, get some arguments going and whatnot, then I would urge you to keep this verse on your heart. It's something that I always try to make sure I'm remembering as I am on there. "We who have ears, let us hear. Listen to others who are hurting, even if we might not agree, and then help them in whatever way we can." So this morning, we who have ears, who have heard the message of Solomon and heard the commands of Christ, what are we doing with that information? Are we listening? Are we hearing what other people have to say? If we're not, I hope and pray that we would make a change in our lives and that we would listen to what other people have to say. Start listening to them, hear their pleas, and if you can, help them in whatever way that we can. Or maybe you heard this morning and you just need the prayers of the church. Something is going on in your life that you need help with and you need prayers for. I can think of no better time than right now to come and make those known to God and to seek the prayers of the church as together we stand and we sing our invitation song.